Valve are being sued by the creators of Humble Bundle, allegedly for anti-competitive practices. It's the sort of thing where I think a lawsuit like that, it could just come up from anyone. You wouldn't be that concerned. A little bit of clout in that it is coming from the creators of Humble Bundle.
Absolutely, which obviously, Humble Bundle sold so many Steam keys for next to nothing that you kind of look at this and go, do you really have much ground to stand on here? But they kind of do, so I guess we'll get into it.
Yeah, so Wallfire Games, who are a small indie studio and also behind Humble Bundle.
Yep.
Actually, and Humble, of course, is now humongously grown from those humble beginnings. But they took Steam to court last year, and it's now basically actually starting to go through the process. It was for a combo of antitrust, anti-competition, and monopoly concerns. And to just briskly go over some key bits of data that you should be aware of, right? So 75% of PC gaming sales go through the Steam store.
Or so they allege.
Now, allegedly, Valve uses that dominance to take an extraordinarily high cut from nearly every sale that passes through its store of 30%. So once again, the cut is coming in. Now, the suit is also highlighting that this is over $6 billion per year in revenue, and that means that Valve makes about $15 million for each of their employees. Now, I don't actually understand why that is something you would bring up in a lawsuit, because that just means it's a very efficient business. I don't think that's a point to hit them with, other than just saying money bad, but I don't really think that's a strong way to make a claim. They continue to say that Valve actively suppresses competition to protect its market dominance, and they abuse their market power to ensure that games are still sold through their store. So, quite a lot of stuff. As a part of this, then, they're noting that basically kind of separating the Steam store and the platform. If a game is not on the platform, then it cannot reach the vast majority of potential customers, right? Because people want to play on the Steam platform, which of course is obviously tied into the Steam store. So it's a bit like, I don't want to say it's like a network effect or something, but it's just the idea of it's like if all of your friends are on a social network, and that's the one you'll use. If all your games are in Steam, then that's the one that you'll use. To what, when does them just being successful in the market end up being an anti-competitive thing? That is a lot of what we're basically going to chew on as we go through this.
Yeah, it's fundamentally what they're saying in this lawsuit was effectively, Steam are so big you can't not be on Steam or else your game will fail.
Yes.
But if you want to put your game on Steam, the platform, you have to put your game on Steam, the store, because Steam won't let you do it any other way. Obviously, they let you get as many keys as you want, but you still have to sell your game on Steam for that to happen. So they're kind of complaining, well, Steam is in control of the entire PC gaming market, and no one's doing anything about that.
I then think what do you want? Do you just want access to the platform without being in the store, meaning that you want Valve to handle your distribution and perhaps give you a bunch of platform features, even when they'll make absolutely no cut? In which case, do you want some sort of feature to be developed called maybe Steam Vendor, where they maybe charge you, the developer, X amount for actually putting a game on the platform, even if it isn't on the store, because at least that way Valve would be generating revenue from that service they'd be providing. I think there's aspects of what they're saying that feel kind of absurd, but there is one thing, which we'll get into later, that I think is a bit more important here, and that is the most favored nations policy. And that essentially means that nobody is allowed to get Steam keys at a better deal than Steam store customers.
Yep.
Which of course then makes me think, oh, wait, this is from the Humble Bundle people.
Yeah. That's what I thought was really interesting about this. And obviously immediately you're likely thinking, like I think everyone did, is, but I buy games for Steam cheaper all the time.
Yes.
But that's on sales, where that's kind of like not the RRP. You can't have your RRP or your SMRP for Americans. You can't have that be lower elsewhere. And I was like, that's interesting. I was fairly sure I've seen that. And I looked around a whole bunch of stores this morning. I was like, I can see a lot of stuff that seems like pseudo-permanently discounted.
Yes.
But nothing has a lower RRP, so this is actually part of their policy for sure.
Sort of thing that technically exists, but do customers actually even notice it?
I mean, that's the thing.
I didn't.
I buy so many games. I buy so many Steam games. I have for the past 10 years now, and I didn't notice. So
Now, what's interesting is this initially kind of was tentatively dismissed, right? Valve fought back, and there's a few scathing lines that we really liked. So, number one, they have no way to prove their claim that Steam has 75% market share. They also say that 30% is the industry standard across large platforms, and they charge 30% when they did not have market dominance. Now, obviously, we look to other stores. We do see things lower than the 30% with the Epic Game Store, as an example. But you look at Apple, you look at Google, I think even GOG, right?
I think so, yeah.
I forget exactly where GOG are, but I know they're not like 12% like Epic. In many other stores, like 30% is kind of standard.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a great thing, but it's not a unique way. It's a bit of a, they're powerful and they're doing really well. That's how it feels to me, rather than it seems like there's probably ways to get Valve that are going to land a lot better than that.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, people were talking about Steam's like Origins as this is the first digital distribution platform. So that 30% was them actually undercutting brick and mortar stores.
Yeah.
So they're like, no, we can do this for cheaper than brick and mortar. So 30% is a good deal for you developers. And they kind of stuck with that, even though, I guess in their argument, it's, well, if we control the entire PC gaming market, why do we still take 30 and not make it 40 or 50? You're like, that's not going to hold up in court as an argument, but you're like, fair enough, actually, yeah.
I suppose they're probably thinking it's like Gabe performing jiu-jitsu with his entire selection of knives, where Gabe's like a knife collector, where basically, because of the most favored nations policy and then the market share, it then effectively means that a store with a lower cut, that lower cut can't be passed down to the consumer.
Yeah.
Which is then what would make the lower cut for an end user more competitive and would allow for another store to start to do better by just on a percentage basis being cheaper. So if, let's just say there's a 10%, it's not this, but another store was like 10% less and the dev and the publisher actually passed that on to the consumer with MSRP, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
In which case it means that is just more financially efficient for the devs and the publishers, which, hey, we're a dev, that'd be awesome for us.
Yep.
But for the end user, which is the thing that's going to shift market share, that's the problem. And I suppose that's probably the core of their argument. Now, the thing there is, ultimately, it's this whole platform dominance that they're pissed off about.
Yeah.
Steam has no duty under Antitrust to just give keys away for free and distribute for free.
Yeah, it's that thing where they're actually just going, we give away keys for other people to sell and don't take a cut. We're doing that. We have no duty to do that whatsoever, but we do it anyway, and you're still trying to attack us for being antitrust. What are you smoking?
You can sell keys on your own platform and piggyback off our incredible distribution system to make money.
Yep. And interestingly enough, after a little bit of investigation today, we'll get into the numbers later, but we actually have a good idea of how many games actually are bought outside Steam, and it's 2-3 times bigger than I thought it would.
Pretty big.
Mad.
So here's the thing. I didn't say this was dismissed. I said it was tentatively dismissed. And this is what you found in the research today. Wildfire were allowed to contest the ruling. It worked. So the fight is on again. Which at the very least means we'll all get juicy data.
Yeah.
That's what I love. What you discovered today, going through the various articles, is that the judge ruled in favor of letting one part of the suit continue, and that they maybe have a point. So essentially the case was trimmed down, allowed to proceed. The judge summed it up by saying that Wildfire are alleging that Valve use written and unwritten rules to control developers. That then influences how games are sold across the whole PC market, and that is sufficient to plausibly allege unlawful conduct.
Yeah, and that's the stuff where we'll get into it shortly, but there's actual stuff that they specifically dealt with, Wildfire, and there's 7 other developers that are individuals. So I didn't really go through their names or anything, but they're this is a class action suit with a couple of other people involved. So they do have grievances against Steam that are okay, there is a point here. There definitely is a point that this is a valid approach, but as to whether it substantiates Steam as a whole, or maybe a customer service rep said something wrong, that's kind of the point here. But all the other stuff about the platform and the store being these should be, these are really too tied closely together and it's giving Steam too much power, the judge is nah, it's... You can only do it on this specific bit about the unwritten rules. That's it.
And I think a good way to explain that is what you found with the story of overgrowth.
Yeah,
right?
this is basically the guts of what Wolfire are complaining about, which was David Rosen, the guy, his brother was the one who set up Humble and then split off from the company just because they were like, Humble's taking more effort than this dev actual work, so okay, we'll split off. But yeah, basically he's like, well, obviously they're super tied to selling keys and the whole business of indie, and they're like, okay, I will sell our game Overgrowth not on Steam. I will sell it DRM free on my own site for cheaper, and then we'll see how that goes. I'll write a blog post about it, I'll gather some data, and apparently he talked to someone at Steam about this, and they were like, no, if you sell your game not on Steam for cheaper, we'll remove it from Steam. And you're like, that's... you can immediately start to see where a little bit of Steam's kind of controlling behavior comes in.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is nothing to do with the Steam platform. This is you trying to sell on your own terms, and Steam are like, no, you are not allowed to give another consumer a better deal than a Steam consumer, which is different to their actual price parity policy, which is about don't give a Steam consumer different stuff.
Yeah.
So this is like technically different, and it's about keeping people on the platform. And that's where Rosen's like was talking about having like alarm bells go off, like, oh, this is actually fairly important, and a couple of other devs had the same experience. But then Ars Technica reporting that that's not a part of their policy, so it seems to be like an individual thing. And that's where I'm like, maybe it was one person, because obviously Valve is so like flat structurally, and they kind of have these issues of, well, what's the actual rules? No one's written them down. That's where the judge says unwritten rules. Yeah. And it's that case of, is there maybe like a couple of people at Steam going, no, keep everyone here? And obviously most consumers are like, yeah, well, I'm not going anywhere else. But it proves a problem for these developers a little bit.
That's the heart of the problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Now there's a little bit more, like Polygon did a little bit of a look into things in 2018 of some devs' experiences. Just examples like how Valve do the regional pricing themselves, and that's basically meant that sometimes devs are just selling games for lower than they want.
Yeah.
They don't exactly have a great way to get around that.
Yeah, it's like all to do with how the automatic currency exchange works and how Valve don't... they get the data from somewhere, but it's not always super accurate. So sometimes devs are like, you're selling this game to these people for way lower than it should be, based on like the exchange rate that I've looked at. And they're like, sorry, that's how we do it. You can manually change it, but do you want to do that for 40 currencies? That's just that case of Valve maybe not having the best system, and developers feeling like, because Valve is so big and Steam is so big, they feel like they don't have any individual say. And that's kind of the point of it, really.
Yeah. So a funny thing then, when we kind of get down to it, there was a GDC survey from 2019. 6% of devs thought that Steam were justifying the 30% cut. And it's an interesting thing, right? 30% is a lot. And I think about, say, stuff with our game. I can definitely see there's times where, after Ludinaricon, like Ludinaricon was decently possible because it was hosted on their platform. We had a presentation, like a playthrough and stuff that me and Thomas did, that was just looping on the Steam store page. That increased our wishlist CTR. We got thousands of wish lists over that period of time. And it's like, well, this is the wishlist function in something that people actually use. Wish lists, we know, are algorithmically important in Steam. We also know that they do have a meaningful conversion rate. It is used by publishers. All the publishers, they know what they're doing. It's used. That whole thing, the discoverability, it's a strange thing. 30%, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot, but also, will we get that many more sales? It's very hard to know. Certainly it's frustrating that they've taken a very different approach to even how Apple have done things. Apple have the whole small business scheme where essentially for indies, or I forget, it's like under $1 million in revenue or something, but it's a way lower cut if you're like under that threshold. So they're doing it in a way of like, okay, look, we want to make our money off the big free-to-play games that are selling gems. You, little indie developer, sure, we'll give you a far lower cut, happy days. And I know it's not an ideal system. I wish Valve would do something like that.
Yeah,
because obviously, like, where they are going to make all of their money is the big sales. But I think then they are probably a little bit shaken when it comes to the likes of exclusivity deals. They can go from 30% down to 25, then down to 20 based on the total revenue. But I think you only unlock 20% after like 50 million
50
revenue.
mil, yep.
So obviously that's, unless the Pale Beyond sells a surprising number of copies, that's something for AA and AAA games.
Basically, I think at 50 mil revenue, you're looking at mostly AAA, I would say. But yeah.
So for indies, their pricing structure is definitely quite rough. But then how many games are there that, because of the way the Steam review system works, tagging, discoverability, discovery queue, etc., how many more sales do they get? So it's the sort of thing, I understand why devs would say this. I think we all want a better deal. If I could have the platform features of Steam and a more Epic-like cut, wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah.
But of course it would be lovely.
Yeah, but then obviously, Steam are paying for those features. They're the ones paying for the development and developing over years. So that 30% went into that. That 30% went into, Steam input. It went into Proton. It's going into all that discoverability. It's going into, is it Steam Remote Play? Where you can just play stuff across all of this like great tech that people kind of ignore when they're looking at the business side, because that's all customer facing stuff. There's lots of developer facing stuff as well on the back end, but so much of it is like, oh, this is the best place for consumers. Nowhere else is as good. And you quickly get that when you buy a game on Origin or you buy a game on Uplay or you on the Epic Game Store. You're like, oh yeah, I guess I'm actually spoiled by Steam because I'm used to everything just working and everything just being great. All this stuff being super easy to implement for devs. And even like stuff like the whole thing I think I saw indie devs have a problem with was the survival of the fittest nature.
Yes.
Where a lot of them felt that they weren't being treated right or cared for by Steam. But coming from YouTube, it's the same thing of, if your game was better reviewed and better played, the algorithm would suit it better.
Yeah, don't get a case of, I'd maybe sometimes call it small YouTuber syndrome, where I see so much terrible advice and terrible blame that just comes down to not taking personal responsibility for why things don't resonate with humans, because ultimately the YouTube algorithm is absurdly human-centric.
Yeah, and I mean, anyone who's been toying with like the Steam Lab experiments for discoverability, that knows what you're going to play. Yep. That knows exactly what games are good and what games you want to play. And it's the same thing there, where it's just kind of, I don't really want to say it, but a little bit of sour grapes comes into mind. A little bit. And that kind of, I think, poisons the well a tiny bit for this 30% cut.
At the very least, it is floating around there. I will definitely say the financial viability of our business in a 15% Steam world than a 30% Steam world, that would absolutely allow us to make bigger things, spend more time on certain aspects of games. Absolutely, totally. Yeah. But what we've got right now is not a terrible situation equally. And that ability to have that customer reach, we do get hundreds of thousands of impressions on Steam. And I know from the analytics, that's not just YouTube stuff. Now, it totally is the case where anything that we send from our YouTube channels over to our game, that's the thin end of the wedge that wakes up the Steam algorithm and says, hey, people are interested in this. And then it kind of carries on. So certainly, a lot of indie devs are very focused on the creative side and stuff. Marketing. That is the bit that I think a lot of people undervalue, because there's a whole bunch of connotations with marketing, but ultimately if you want your game to actually be seen, then it needs to be marketed. Anyway, that's kind of besides the point.
Yeah.
As we move to competition, of course, Epic Game Store has got that incredible cut for developers. Extra incredible if you are developing in Unreal, because then they forego their engine licensing fee. Which is certainly interesting. I wonder if anyone will ever raise an eyebrow at that in the future. But 15% market share is what Tim Sweeney claims.
Yeah. Now, he's claimed that, and I did see in reporting that there was some source looked through some initial data went, that definitely looks closer to 2% than 15%. So I don't know if Tim's twiddling some numbers around, or if the methodology of the other person was a little bit off, or, because Tim has access to all the data.
Yeah.
Of course, outsiders don't. So it's somewhere between 2 and 15%. I mean, I imagine it's closer to 15 because Tim can't lie, but he can lie if he doesn't get caught. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Still,
Also, I
yeah.
suppose less scrutiny, privately held company, etc.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
You know, it's not like one of those things where Elon throws a bunch of tweets and suddenly the SEC are like, oh, hello.
Yeah.
I assume. I don't really know too much about those things. Another thing, though, it's not this is not an anti-competitive thing. It's just that Steam are so competitively fit that EA, Bethesda, and Xbox all move back to Steam, even though the platform fee for an EA game sold in Origin is 0% because they are Origin. Right? Like, the only one who's majorly sticking with it is Activision Blizzard. So I think that's also quite telling. As for some of this means, though, and like thinking about some aspects of like game pricing, well, the price parity thing is very obvious in RRPs. Yeah. And we have totally... You looked, you saw that. It doesn't count sales, though.
Yeah, so it's like, it's a thing of, literally speaking, by the rules, you're not allowed to get a better deal. But you totally can, because Steam doesn't mind, and they can't include sales. So the example I have is what I did recently the other week, where I was like, okay, the Monster Hunter Rise sale on Steam just ended. Ah, shit. Because I just buy games on Steam by default. Okay, I'll look elsewhere, see if there's a sale still going on. Fanatical was selling Monster Hunter Rise for, the RRP was the same as Steam, but it was on sale for their May Madness sale, and that was 21 quid. So that's a good, like, 50% off. Then they had their May Madness thing where you got a free game with a purchase, and it was Vermintide 1, which obviously, you know, that's like a 15 quid game that I just got for free because I bought a 20 quid game that was originally 45 quid.
Yeah.
Then it was like, do you want 2 mystery keys? And I'm like, my Steam library is full of shit from when I was buying 10 mystery key bundles from awful websites in like 2013, 2014. So why not? And then I got 4 loan sales on Automa Chef. I'm like, that's like 20 quid worth of games for 180. That's a better deal than Steam's giving. Obviously, it's random. It could have been terrible, but that's a better deal than Steam's giving.
I don't know about the other game, but Far Loan Sales is great.
Yeah. I mean, Automa Chef is pretty good as well. It's yeah, but that was 85 quid worth of Steam games for just like 23 quid. And that was just because they were to sale. That's what, like, as soon as I saw all this lawsuit stuff, I was like, I can get where you're arguing from a principled standpoint, but it just doesn't hold true in reality a lot of the time.
Yeah. And then we think about, okay, it's a 30% cut in games sold on Steam.
Yes.
And that is obviously the thing that actually does matter for developers, publishers, and consumers. For some of Valve's own back-end economics, though, there's interesting things if you think about the percentage of games used on the Steam platform and what that would mean for their cut. Basically, what happened is a Reset Era user put together a script that would compare how many Steam reviews are from Steam purchases versus other. Other basically means external key sites for the most part. Now, there is a big assumption there that you have similar rates of reviewing, which may or may not be the case. It also does ignore the lower split based on revenue that Valve have introduced, which is a fairly major thing. But at least this still does make some form of point, where basically if you sample the top 100 games in Steam, only 72% of those are actually sold through Steam, and that would kind of give you like this average platform game on a platform cut of 20.07% instead of 30. Now there's so many asterisks with that data, but it's food for thought.
Yeah, it's like even if you look at that, you know, everyone reports the 30% cut, right? If Valve stood up, obviously this doesn't matter to developers and publishers as much because like retail platforms will largely have similar tiers of cut and stuff like that. But as an example, if Valve stood up in court and went, oh yeah, no, we don't take 30%. We take 30% in these sales, but if you include all of these other factors, then realistically we take closer to 20 to 25%. Then that's immediately, oh, that's not 30. Oh, that's 5 to 10% better than the industry average. Maybe you're not actually using your market dominance to abuse stuff because you're giving away 10% of your cut to competitive retailers, not competitive platforms, but competitive retailers. And that just kind of like pulls the rug out of the entire argument underneath from like the holistic perspective of all the consumers and retailers and stuff. From the debt perspective, it's still, 30% everywhere, it's still going to hurt. But it's like, yeah, I think it's funny that Valve have that data and they're sitting on it. And I feel like they could at any point, Gabe just goes in an interview and goes, oh yeah, last I checked, we actually take an average of like 23%. And then that just changes the entire narrative. But they don't. They're like, We'll keep that under wrap and key.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting if any of these things actually do come out via this lawsuit.
Yeah.
I think the main point here is whenever there is someone who's dominant in a market, you know, that's not when it's the time to be a fanboy. That's where it's the time where like, hey, if it's a good service, enjoy it, and you know, think great of the devs who make it. But still, a degree of suspicion and skepticism is always a good thing.
100%.
Let's hope Valve just works harder to justify what they do charge.
Yeah.
Or maybe make some sort of like, I don't know, first $1 million in revenue that would apply to indies, or first 500 grand maybe.
That would be nice, yeah.
Or even like first 250. That would be great too. You know, I kind of worked for Apple. It got Apple off a bit of a hook.
Yeah.
It helped them out legally, so. But obviously, I very transparently would benefit from this. So who knows? Anyway, that's basically that. Steam.
They have a ton of power, and they haven't abused it yet, according to what we can figure out.
Yes.
I think that's the real takeaway. So hopefully this lawsuit doesn't really go anywhere, because you don't really want to poke a bear like that, do you?
No. So anyway, right, there we go. Hopefully when this thing carries through a little bit more,
Yeah.
at the very least, we'll get some interesting numbers.
Absolutely.
Talk about that. All right. That's it for us. See you next time.